Hi, everybody. Happy horrors, and welcome to another episode of Loren Molloy Reads To. Tonight, I'm going to read from this book, True Scary Stories. Yes, it's a scholastic book, and yet the stories are true and truly scary. So let's start. The Mysterious Whaley House. Have you ever seen a ghost? Some people think that ghosts are the shadows of dead people who don't know or refuse to accept that they have died. These ghosts will sometimes haunt the place that they loved most in life, usually their homes. The ghosts are often confused and wander through the rooms, hallways, attics, and basements of their old homes for hundreds of years. They often frighten, even torment, the home's new residents. Thomas Whaley was a pioneer and a businessman. He built the Whaley House in San Diego for his family in 1857. At that time, the Whaley House was the grandest home on the West Coast. The house was so important that it was also used as a courthouse and official meeting place. Two presidents, Ulysses S. Grant and Benjamin Harris, stayed at the Whaley House when they visited San Diego. For almost 100 years, several generations of the Whaley family lived in the house. The house is the oldest brick building in Southern California, and it is now a museum. But the residence has a darker history, too, as a haunted house. The ghosts most often found in the house are those of Mr. and Mrs. Whaley, Annabelle Washburn, a friend of one of the Whaley children who died after an accident in the Whaley's backyard, and Yankee Jim, a drifter who was hung and buried on the property before the house was built as punishment for stealing a boat. June Reading has worked at the Whaley House Museum since the 1960s and has seen the ghosts firsthand. She once saw Thomas Whaley standing on the stairway landing on a Sunday afternoon. He wore a black coat and a pair of old-fashioned pants with a broad-brimmed black hat. Mrs. Reading knew it was Mr. Whaley because she had read letters and books that said he wore that kind of clothing. Many other museum employees have also seen a man in a black coat staring at them while they worked. Another time, Mrs. Reading and another museum guide heard a man's mysterious deep laugh. They figured that the voice belonged to Thomas Whaley. Other people have smelled the smoke from phantom cigars in the rooms where Mr. Whaley used to relax with his family. Since no smoking is allowed in the museum, the odors were very mysterious. Was Mr. Whaley smoking a cigar in the afterlife? Many museum visitors have also witnessed spirit shapes and strange smells in the house. One visitor saw a person who wasn't there, but then suddenly wasn't. Some visitors have taken photographs of the museum that showed strange blobs of light floating in the air. One summer, Mrs. Reading said there was a lot of static electricity in the house. Someone saw what looked like fireflies buzzing around the room where the Whaley children used to play. After calling an expert to ask about these strange events, Mrs. Reading learned that the fireflies might have been flashes of light coming from a living or once living being. Mrs. Reading returned to the room and continued to watch the weird lights. After a long time, they seemed to take the form of a woman standing at the end of the bed, folding clothes. Was the woman Mrs. Whaley, doing chores even in death? Sometimes during the night, the burglar alarm at the Whaley House will go off when there are no burglars around. It has been hard to get police officers to check on the haunted house. One time, an officer showed up at the house after the alarm sounded, but was too afraid to get out of his car to investigate. When Mrs. Redding joined him, the officer mustered up a little courage and entered the house. He would not go any farther than the entry hall, though. He asked Mrs. Redding to check out all the rooms by herself. That's not okay. Other ghosts have been seen at the house, too. A museum guide who worked at the Whaley House for 9 years sometimes heard heavy footsteps that belonged to Yankee Jim. During one of her tours, several visitors smiled at the guide. When she asked them what they were laughing at, they told her about the funny man standing next to her as she spoke. The visitors said the man looked like Yankee Jim. In the kitchen of the house, utensils and rocking chairs have seemed to move on their own. Some people think the ghost of Annabelle Washburn is responsible. After her accident in the backyard, Mr. Whaley carried her into the kitchen, where she died. Could Annabelle be haunting the place of her early death? The weird events and strange sightings at the Whaley House have led many people to believe that Mr. and Mrs. Whaley's ghosts remain in their old home, acting as protectors of the mansion. Maybe Mr. and Mrs. Whaley think the museum staff and visitors are guests that they must greet and welcome into their home. But who knows for sure? Maybe the Whaleys have not yet realized that they are dead. Maybe they are doomed to wander the rooms of their old family home forever. That's the end of that one. I wonder, have you been to the Whaley House? Have you seen a ghost? Have you seen strange things happening around your house? Weird smells? Do tell in the comment section. The next story is called The Bell Witch. The Bell Witch. In the early 1800s, a man named John Bell moved his family from North Carolina to a farm in Tennessee. The family settled in a town known as Adams. Mr. Bell bought some land in a large log home. The Bells quickly made friends in the town. One day in 1817, while walking through one of his cornfields, John Bell came across a strange-looking animal. The creature had the body of a dog and the head of a rabbit. Frightened, Mr. Bell aimed his rifle and fired at the animal. He missed, and it ran away. The shots that John Bell fired were the beginning of one of the greatest hauntings ever. The story of the Bell Witch has inspired many books and movies. After what happened in the cornfield, Mr. Bell tried to forget about the animal. But that night, the Bell family heard a strange beating sound on the outside walls of their house. This mysterious sound continued, becoming stronger each night. Mr. Bell and his sons would run outside to catch the culprit, but they never found anyone or anything. More problems soon followed. One night, the Bell children woke up scared. They said they heard rats biting on their bedposts. The children said that their bed covers and pillows were being torn off their beds and thrown on the floor by some unseen force. The mean spirit tormented Betsy, the youngest daughter. It pulled her hair and hit her, sometimes leaving red marks on her face. As terrifying weeks went on, the Bell family began to hear a faint, weak voice. It sounded like an old woman crying or singing. John Bell didn't want to share his misfortune with his friends and neighbors. However, Mr. Bell finally asked James Johnston, his closest friend, for help. Mr. Johnston and his wife decided to spend the night at the Bell home to observe the haunting. They experienced the same terrifying things. After his bed covers were torn off his bed, Mr. Johnston jumped up asking, "Who are you and what do you want?" The attack stopped for the night. Afterwards, the strange voice in the Bell house became louder and stronger. It sang songs, talked about the Bible, and told, word for word, 2 different church sermons that took place at the same time, many miles apart. Were all of these mysterious events caused by John Bell's encounter with the strange-looking animal in the cornfields? No one could be sure. Soon, news of the Bell Witch spread through the town, and even to faraway Nashville. By 1819, the brave General Andrew Jackson, whom Mr. Bell's son fought in the Battle of New Orleans, heard the story. General Jackson and several other men traveled from Nashville to the Bell farm to investigate the haunting. After staying just a few days, the general and his men left in a hurry. They were victims of the mysterious spirit, too. General Jackson, who later became president of the United States, said, "I'd rather fight the entire British Army than deal with the Bell Witch." John Bell got sick soon after General Jackson's John Bell got sick soon after General Jackson's visit. Mr. Bell said that the witch told him she wanted to harm old John Bell. On the morning of December 20, 1820, after a long illness, John Bell died. Mr. Bell's family found a small vial of strange liquid that Mr. Bell drank the night before he died. "I gave old Jack a big dose of that last night," the voice of the witch bragged, "and that fixed him." Mr. Bell's son threw the vial into the fireplace. The liquid in the vial shot up the chimney in the form of a bright blue flame. After John Bell's funeral, his family heard the witch again. As they left the cemetery, the witch laughed and sang a song. Soon after the funeral, the attacks and the voices stopped for a long time. In April of 1821, the witch visited John Bell's wife, Lucy. She told Lucy that she would return in 7 years for another visit. 7 years later, in 1828, the witch returned as promised. This time, the witch's haunting was centered on John Bell Jr. The witch talked about life on earth and religion. The witch also made predictions about the Civil War, World War I, the Great Depression, and World War II. After the 1828 visit, the witch never appeared to any member of the Bell family ever again. The cause of the Bell family's haunting is still a mystery. In fact, even today, almost 200 years later, if you visit the old Bell farm on a cold and rainy nights, small lights can be seen glinting over fields. Phantom sounds of people talking and children playing have been reported in the area. Are these just strange coincidences? Or will the Bell Witch haunt the land forever? What do you think? Have you ever heard of the story of the Bell Witch before? Did you ever go there before? Please let me know in the comment section. I'll be looking. You guys ready for another true scary story? Can you believe this is a kid's book that I got at an elementary school kids scholastic book fair? Yeah, it is. The Haunting of Emily's Bridge. All across the country, from Maine to Hawaii, people have told chilling tales of haunted houses, haunted restaurants, and even haunted movie theaters. You may even know about a haunted house or building in your hometown. More unusual is the story of Emily's Bridge near Stowe, Vermont. Built in 1844 across the Gold Brook, it is the oldest covered bridge in the United States. It is 50 feet long and has plain wooden board siding and a metal roof. Many people who live in the surrounding area believe that the bridge is haunted. Also known as Gold Brook Bridge or Stowe Hollow Bridge, the haunted bridge was named after Emily Smith, a young woman who lived near Stowe in the late 1800s. One of the most popular stories explaining the bridge's haunting takes place on Emily's wedding day. Oh, Emily was riding in a horse-drawn wagon and was about to cross the covered bridge. One of the horses got scared and bolted, throwing Emily out of the wagon and onto the jagged rocks on the banks of the Gold Brook. Emily died from her injuries. Another story also takes place on Emily's wedding day. When the young lady's groom decided that he didn't want to marry her, she was so sad that she threw herself off the bridge. She drowned in the brook's cold water. Several other versions of the Emily Smith story are also based on the events of her wedding day. No one can be sure exactly what happened to Emily Smith on the bridge, but many people think that her ghost haunts it to this day. The most famous haunting of Emily's Bridge took place one night in 1975. Ed Rhodes, who lived in Stowe his whole life, was driving in his car with a friend, Jim, during a thunderstorm. To escape the heavy rain, Ed pulled the car onto Emily's Bridge. Ed thought it would be best to wait out the storm under the bridge's roof. A few minutes after Ed stopped the car, Jim screamed, "Let's get out of here!" Ed hit the gas and the car roared off the bridge. "What happened?" Ed asked his friend as he slowed the car just past the bridge. "I heard a voice," Jim said, "a female voice that yelled, 'Help!'" "Let's go back and check it out," Ed said. Ed drove the car back to the same spot on the bridge. A minute later, a white light flashed on the side of the bridge. It was like a strobe light, flashing 6 or 7 times. Ed sped the car off the bridge and headed back to town. He never forgot that night. Other people in Stowe have reported strange events on the bridge. Some say they felt warm spots on the bridge during the chill of January. Others have reported cold spots in the heat of July. While crossing the bridge, hats have blown off people's heads even when there's no wind. Ed Rhodes experienced another Emily Bridge haunting in 1987. Mr. Rhodes was leading a tour of Stowe, and he and his group were getting close to Emily's Bridge. One of the tourists was a 7-year-old girl who told Ed about a dream that she had the night before. She said she dreamt about a woman with long brown hair wearing a flowered white dress. The girl told Ed about her dream right before they reached the bridge. As the group stepped onto the bridge, the girl pointed and cried, "That's her! The woman from my dream! Right there!" Was it the ghost of Emily Smith? What do you think? Another weird incident at Emily's Bridge involved a fashion photographer who was taking pictures in the area. The photographer took pictures of his model near Emily's Bridge because the bridge and the brook looked very pretty. And then a strange thing happened. When the photographer developed his film, all the pictures turned out perfect. That is, all of the pictures except for the one shot on Emily's Bridge. In those photographs, the bridge was in focus, but the models appeared just as a blur. Did the ghost of Emily Smith leave her mark on the pictures? What do you think? And so, if you're ever near Stowe, Vermont, you might come across a beautiful old covered bridge Emily's Bridge. If you see or hear something that you can't quite explain, don't be surprised. It's probably just Emily Smith letting you know she's there. What do you think? Did you ever hear that one before? Have you ever been to that bridge before? Have you ever had any experiences seeing or hearing anything like that? Let me know in the comment section. Are you ready for the next one? Attack in Ape Canyon. Have you ever heard of Bigfoot or Sasquatch? The mysterious ape man? Well, Fred Beck has. He even saw the monster and lived to tell the tale. Fred was a gold miner who worked in the southwestern Washington state. In July of 1924, Fred, his friend Hank, and 3 other miners were working on a gold dig 2 miles east of Mount St. Helens, near what now called Ape Canyon. One night, strange, hairy, ape-like creatures attacked the cabin that Fred and the other miners lived in. Hank called the creatures mountain devils. Newspapers wrote about the mysterious story for years. A few days before the attack, Fred and Hank discovered unusual animal tracks in the forest. The tracks were large. One of them measured 19 inches long. Imagine that, 19 inches long. The miners knew that no animal could have made them. Before the attack, the miners also heard a shrill, strange whistling each evening. The whistle seemed to come from a nearby ridge and was answered by a whistle from another ridge. They also heard a sound that Fred described as a booming, thumping sound, like something was hitting itself on the chest. A day or two after the first discovering the tracks and hearing the strange noises, Fred and Hank walked to a nearby spring to get water. They took their rifles as protection. At the spring, they saw a hairy creature standing about 300 feet away. Fred judged the creature to have been about 7 feet tall with blackish brown hair. Hank was frightened and shot at the creature. It quickly disappeared from view. It ran fast and upright like a man. Scared and worried by the incident, Fred and Hank returned to their camp and told the rest of the miners what happened. They were spooked and all agreed, gold or no gold, that they would leave the next morning. Night was about to fall, and it was too... Night was about to fall, and it was too dark to leave right away. The miners went to their pine log cabin to sleep. At about midnight, the men woke up. There was a loud sound outside. It sounded like there were many feet stomping on the ground next to the cabin. Something strong and heavy pounded against the cabin wall. The pounding was so fierce that some of the clinking, chinking, the mud placed between the pine logs to seal them together broke loose. The miners were able to see outside through the spaces where the chinking had broke away. Fred saw 3 giant, hairy creatures, but it sounded like there were many more. The creatures threw stones at the cabin. Some of the rocks they threw fell down the chimney. The miners fired their rifles at the ceiling when they heard the creatures on the roof. A creature tried to break down the cabin's door, slamming its heavy body against it. The terrified miners had to brace the door with a log to keep it from collapsing. One creature reached a strong, hairy arm through the cabin wall and grabbed one of the miners' axes by the handle. Before the thing could pull the axe out, though, Fred turned the head of the axe so that it caught on the logs. Hank shot at the creature, and it let go of the axe handle. "If you leave us alone, we'll leave you alone," Hank shouted, truly scared, and we'll all go home in the morning. The attack ended just before daybreak. When it was light enough to see, the miners slowly emerged from the wrecked cabin. Fred saw one of the ape-like creatures standing about 80 yards away near the edge of the canyon. He shot at it 3 times. The creature toppled over the cliff and fell down into the gorge 400 feet below. We need to leave as soon as possible and forget our supplies, Hank said excitedly. It's better to lose them than our lives. The fellow miners agreed. They left over $200 in supplies behind. They piled into their truck and left. Frank persuaded his friends not to tell anyone else about the attack. He thought that no one would believe such a fantastic story anyway. Miners made a pact to keep quiet about what happened. When the miners reached the ranger station at the edge of the forest, Hank forgot about his promise to Fred and told the rangers everything. Soon, the story leaked out to the local papers, and the great hairy ape hunt of 1924 began. Reporters from Portland and Seattle interviewed the miners. Many people came to the Mount St. Helens area looking for the great hairy apes, or mountain devils. After the attack, Fred returned to the cabin with 2 reporters and a police detective. They found large tracks and took photographs of them. But Fred could not find the creatures that had fallen into the gorge. None of the other creatures were seen either. Since 1924, sightings of strange ape-like animals have been reported in Canada, Washington, Oregon, and Northern California. More sightings and weird events have been reported at Ape Canyon too, but none were as fantastic or as frightening as those of Fred Beck and his fellow miners. Now, what do you think? Have you ever heard that story before? Do you believe that there could be such creatures? Do you think maybe it was like a Scooby-Doo episode? And whoever they were in costume, trying to keep all the miners away from their gold. Have you ever seen a creature like that? Have you seen tracks like that? Let me know in the comment section, of course, please. But I wonder about that story. Were there great hairy apes in Ape Canyon? Did they truly attack Fred and Hank and the miners? Or was it like a Scooby-Doo episode where there were people, mountain people, dressed up, or maybe just looked like that, didn't want other people stealing their gold? That doesn't mean that they aren't real. Maybe they are. Maybe Sasquatches and things like it are real. And yet, this is still just like a Scooby-Doo episode. Maybe he really was a Sasquatch ape-like creature. What do you think? Let me know in the comment section, please. I'd love to know. And if you don't believe in any of these things, that's great too. I don't mind. They're fun. They're fun stories, and supposedly they're true. So that makes it a little more fun for me. Here's another one. Rex, the ghost dog. Have you ever seen a ghost dog? Many people believe that, like people, animals become ghosts too. And some people, like the ones in this story, have even witnessed a ghostly dog haunting. Sunnybank, a mansion in New Jersey, was the home of Albert Hazen Terhune. Born 1872, died 1942. A famous author of dog stories, Mr. Terhune was a dog lover. He adored collies, but his favorite pet was a mutt named Rex, who was completely devoted to the writer. Rex was a large dog, the size of a Great Dane, with light brown fur and a nasty-looking scar across his forehead. The scar made Rex appear much more ferocious than he really was. Although Rex barked at almost every guest who visited Mr. Terhune, he was a very sweet dog. Rex loved to curl up at his master's feet while he was riding. After a bad accident, Rex died in March 1916. Mr. Terhune was very sad when Rex died. He dedicated his book, Lad, a Dog, to the memory of Rex. About a year after Rex's death, an old friend of Mr. Terhune's, Mr. Grannis, visited Sunnybank. Mr. Grannis had not been to his friend's home in many years. After a walk and lunch, Mr. Grannis said to Mr. Terhune, "I thought you only liked collies." "Yes," Mr. Terhune replied. "In fact, all of my dogs are collies." "Well, what about that dog that stood all afternoon on the porch looking through the window at you?" his friend asked. "The dog with the short light brown fur and that strange scar on his forehead. What's his name?" Mr. Terhune knew that Mr. Grannis was talking about his old friend Rex. How could that be? Did Mr. Grannis see Rex's ghost? "I don't know," Mr. Terhune finally answered. The appearance of the strange dog was a mystery. In 1918, Mr. Healy, a businessman who was interested in dogs, visited Mr. Terhune. On an early trip to Sunnybank, Mr. Healy had been impressed with Rex and knew how much he loved his master. Mr. Healy did not know that Rex died in 1916. After dinner, Mr. Healy got ready to say goodnight. Just before leaving, he sighed sadly and said, "I wish there was some creature on earth that adored me as much as Rex does you. I watched him all evening. He lay there at your feet the whole time, looking up at your face." Mr. Terhune was shocked by his guest's words. "That's impossible," he shouted. "Rex has been dead now for more than 2 years." Mr. Healy stood by what he saw, saying, "I know that he was lying at your feet all night, just as I've seen him do since he was a pup." Mr. Terhune thought about his friend's words. A collie named Bruce was the only dog Mr. Terhune now allowed in his room. After Rex died, Bruce never stepped on the patch of floor where Rex used to lie. Bruce would always walk around Rex's old spot on the floor. It seemed like Bruce was avoiding something that was lying there. Could Rex's ghost have been lying at his master's feet, just as Rex did when he was alive? Mr. Terhune didn't believe in ghosts, yet 2 of his best friends claimed they saw Rex years after his death. Did the ghost of Rex really walk the halls and sleep on the floors of Sunnybrook? Neither Mr. Terhune nor anyone else alive could be sure. Now, what do you think? Do you think that doggies and cats can be ghosts too? Have you ever seen one? What do you think? Let me know in the comments section. Let me know if you enjoyed these stories from True Scary Stories, ages 7 and up by Scholastic. Trying to let you see the book cover. If you'd like me to read more from this book, please let me know in the comments section as well. And once again, please remember to check out all of my other videos on my YouTube channel. Please remember to subscribe and turn on notifications so that when I go live, you can be live with me. I hope you enjoyed this story, or stories, I should say, from True Scary Stories. And as always, I hope you had a wonderful day. I hope you had a wonderful evening. I hope you enjoyed the stories. And happy horrors. Until next time.